Hello dear students, so now today we would move ahead in this first chapter of class 12 chemistry, that is solid state. So here today we would be discussing the types of unit cells. Okay, so in the previous video I just told you about the unit cell and the lattice space lattice. Okay, so these things we just talked in the previous video. So here today we would be talking about the types of unit cell. Okay, so now if you see, there are two types of unit cells. So first one is the primitive unit cells. What? Primitive unit cells. These are the first type of unit cell. What are these cells? Means these are the cells where the particles, or you can say the atoms, are present at the corner. Okay, let's say, let me make a primitive unit cell. Let's say this is the primitive unit cell. Let me make this primitive unit cell. Okay, this is the primitive unit cell. Okay, now if the particles are only at the corners, then you would be calling such cells as the primitive unit cells. So you have the particles at the corner. How many corners are total? 8 corners are there. So particles are here at the corners. Okay, are you getting this? So if the particles are at the corners only, then you would be calling such cells as the primitive unit cells. Isn't it? Getting it or not? So let me write about the primitive unit cell here. So what are primitive unit cells? Means these are also known as the simple unit cells. Okay, so where the particles, or you can say the atoms, occupy the space only at the corner. So such cells are known as the primitive unit cells. Then we have the second category of the unit cell, and we are just calling it as the centered unit cell, or also we call it as non-primitive unit cell. Okay, so let me write it here: non-primitive unit cells, and same we call as centered unit cell. Isn't it? Centered unit cell, both are same. Okay, so what are these non-primitive and centered unit cells then? Means these are the unit cells where the particles are at other places also beside the corner. Means the particle would be at the corners also and at other places also. Are you getting it? In case of the primitive unit cell, you have the particles only at the corners. But in case of the non-primitive or the centered unit cell, you have the particles at corners as well as at other places also. Okay, so we would be calling such unit cells as the non-primitive unit cell. So we can say here the non-primitive cells also can be of many types. Okay, so let me first write about the non-primitive unit cell here. So what are the non-primitive unit cell? Means here the particles occupy space at other places also beside the corner. Means at the corner the particles are there, but beside the corner you have the particles at other places also. Okay, are you getting it? So this was the second category of the unit cell. Now if you see, we can divide this second category again into the three categories. Okay, we can again divide these non-primitive unit cells into three categories. We have A, B and C. Okay, we have face centered unit cells, then we have body centered unit cells, then we have end face centered unit cells. Okay, so these are the three types of non-primitive unit cell. Okay, so let me define one by one all of these. So let me tell you here, non-primitive unit cells are of three types. Okay, so let me erase this, and now let's move towards these three categories of the non-primitive unit cells. Now, as I have told you, we can divide the non-primitive unit cells into three categories. First one, face-centered unit cells. What are the face-centered cubic unit cells? Means here the particles present at corners and on each face center also. Okay, suppose let me make a cubical unit cell here. Let me make this cubical unit cell here. Getting this? This is the cubical unit cell. So particles would occupy the space at the corners. There are 8 corners, isn't it? So particles would occupy the space at 8 corners. Means here at the corners, at all the 8 corners, you have the particles, isn't it? So beside the corner, you have the particles on each face center. So how many faces here total? 6 faces in a cube. So on each face center, let's say suppose this is the first face. So here you have the particle, and this is the upper one face. So in between you have the particle, this one. So this is how on each face center we have also the particle here. So now if we just talk about the lattice points here, lattice points means the space, or the, you can say, where the particles are there. Okay, at how many points the particles are there. So if you consider about the lattice points, so how many points? Lattice points means where the presence of particle is there, we just call it as the lattice point. So how many lattice points are there? If you see, the particles are present at 8 corners, because 8 corners are there, and beside 8 corners you have the particles on each face center. How many faces here? 6 face. So you have particle at 6 face centers there. So total lattice points would be how much? 14. So there are 14 lattice points there in case of the face centered cubic unit cells. Okay, then you have the second category of the unit cell, that is body centered cubic unit cell. So here the particle would occupy the space at corners also, and the body center. So now we have considered about the components of the cubical unit cell that I have already discussed there. So how many body centers are there? There would be only one body center, means the complete body is this. So there would be a center there. So means one body center, and at the corner. So particles are present at corners and one body center, because you have only one body center there. So if you just talk about the lattice points LP here, in case lattice points means where the presence of particles is there. Okay, so you can see you have particles at 8 corners, then you have particles at body center. How many body centers here? Only one. So how many lattice points are there? 9 lattice points are there. Okay, now the third one category of the non-primitive unit cell is end face centered cubic unit cells. Means you have the particles on the particles at the corners. So beside the corner you have the particle at 2 opposite faces. Getting it or not? You have the particles here at the corner, and beside the corner you have the particle at 2 opposite faces, any 2 opposite faces. Let's say this one face and this one face. If this one not, upper one and down one. If this one not, here this front one and this back side one. Okay, means any 2 faces, particles would be there at the center of any 2 faces, opposite faces, and at the corners. Okay, so if you just talk about the lattice point in this case, so how many lattice points would be here? So if you just talk about the total particles here that are present here, the means the space where the particle is there. So you have the particles at corners, so there are 8 corners, and then you have the particles at 2 opposite face centers. Let's say this one face and that one face. So here you would have the particle, and here also you would have the particle. Getting it or not? Means at the 2 face centers you have the particle. So total lattice points would be how much? How many? 10 lattice points are there. Are you getting this? So that is all for today. Now we would be discussing some more topics of this chapter in the upcoming lectures. Till then, stay tuned and keep watching. Thank you. Have a good day.